the society has progressed, it really has failed us as we've created this inhuman society. And you mentioned two responses. If I, and forgive me if I get it wrong, but you mentioned the affirmation and resignation. The way of affirmation and the way of resignation. Describe those a bit, because I think people do drift between, and you actually mentioned that drifting between two poles is how you described that. Bring that out for a second, because I don't think a lot of our people, they do know something's wrong. They don't know what it is. They don't, they're just kind of carried along, as we were talking in the pre-show walkthrough, like, you know, the EAC, they're just carried along in these currents of thought and don't even realize it, but they do know that they're tired of the ride.
Yeah.
And there's two responses that you talk about. Describe what these two are.
So society makes us this promise. It says to us, if you will accept this burden of belonging to yourself, then you will live a full and satisfying life. But it never fulfills its promise. C.S. Lewis makes this argument that demons or false idols never fulfill their promises, and it's true. So the false gods don't fulfill their promises. Society fails us, and inevitably we turn that on ourselves, and we have to cope in some way. And I think there are two primary ways we cope. There are some who look at this promise and say, okay, what I need to do is I need to work harder. And that's the people who turn to affirmation. And we say, you know what, the system basically works. And so it's really a matter of my will. And these tend to be people who are high achieving. They tend to be people who are maybe from good families, or who are what we would call privileged, or who are just in a good position in life, who have been successful, who are highly intelligent, or who are gifted athletically. And they say, you know what, if I do my parts, actually, I think the promise is going to work. You know, maybe it hasn't worked in the past, but I think, you know, if I keep trying, it'll work this time. I just need to put in more effort. I need to put in more time. And so I'm going to turn to a life coach. Nothing necessarily against life coaches, but I'm just going to put in more into that. I'm going to work out harder. I'm going to get up earlier. I'm going to pour myself and discipline my will. I'm going to find more techniques. I'm going to, you know, to do more, and eventually it's going to pay off, and I will get the payout of a fulfilling and satisfying life that society has promised me if I accept the burden of belonging to myself. And then there are those who are resigned, who basically look at that promise and say, no, it's rigged. The game is absolutely rigged. The promise is flawed. It's fundamentally flawed. The only people who are successful are the people who are privileged. And I cannot compete because society is hyper competitive, and I can't compete in a hyper competitive society because I was not gifted with wealth or athleticism or beauty or whatever. And so I'm going to check out. And contemporary society is a very interesting society from a historical perspective, because it's easy to, at least in the West, you can check out and live a highly entertaining and fairly affluent, comfortable life. So, for example, in the past, if you checked out of society, if you no longer strove, if you didn't try to advance and keep up, you would starve, right? But today, you can you can work a very menial job, provide for yourself, and get high quality internet, as long as you can afford internet access and you've got a phone. Right, you've got access to YouTube and video games, and and pornography, and you can keep yourself entertained. You can connect to an online community, and you can essentially check out of society and say, I'm not going to play the game anymore. And there are lots of ways that can turn out. I mean, I think of, you know, the most extreme ways. There are sort of violent extremism for young men. Right. Unfortunately, there's ways of, of turning to that. But less extreme ways just look like giving up, just look like binge watching Netflix for hours. I think in my experience, a lot of people who are what I call affirming, who basically say, this system works, society works, I just need to accept this burden and try to create my identity and meaning and purpose and value and all these things. Eventually they hit a wall. And I see this all the time with people. They think they can keep going, and then they hit a wall. They realize that they can't actually compete, and then they crumble, and then they become resigned, and they find themselves binge watching Netflix. And that's why I describe that sort of drifting between two poles. My sense is that a lot of contemporary people end up drifting eventually towards a kind of resignation over time.